What's up, Buckeye fans? I'm Patrick Murphy here with another Bucknuts Happy Hour episode for you. We've got an interesting one today. We're going to do some talk about the Ohio State-Texas game, which has obviously made a lot of news over the last couple weeks. I did some reporting on that, and I'm going to kind of go through what I was told, people I've talked to, kind of the process that went into what we now know is the game kicking off week 1 at noon on the big noon kickoff. Not a surprise, but a disappointment, I think, for a lot of Buckeye fans and people involved with the program too, from my understanding. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about some of the other kickoff times that were announced this week and maybe forecast what some other games will be for the Buckeyes this season when they will kick off, based on kind of what we know and how things have worked in the past. So I'll go through that whole thing here shortly. As always, if you're watching this live on YouTube, please give that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. You get all of our video content on our YouTube page, which right now I know there's not a ton other than the podcasts, which are great, but we will have more coming up here soon. Ohio State recruiting camps are starting in June. We'll have videos from those. And obviously, as we head in closer to the season, we just learned today, we're recording this on Friday, that the Buckeyes will kick off fall camp on at the end of July. I think it's July 31st, and fans will be able to attend the first 3 games. You can read about that on Bucknuts. So not too far. So good time to get in on the channel. If you're listening to this on any podcast platforms, please give us comments, 5-star review. All of that is very helpful. Also, if you're watching this live, feel free to throw questions, comments, whatever, as we go through this in the comment section. We should have time at the end. And as I've said before, I love you guys asking questions, commenting, interacting, so I can answer some of those at the end of the show or as we get to them and whatnot. That way, I just don't feel like I'm talking to myself as much. As for the beer this week, we're back with Red Stripe. I was gone last week. I was actually out of the country. Took a long weekend with some guys. We went over to England, and so that was why there was no show, and also why I am still sort of recovering. Still have some Red Stripe, which I actually had while I was in England. So cheers, hooray beer. Okay, so let's get into this Ohio State-Texas kickoff time. As we all know now, whether you like it or not, it's going to be at noon on Saturday, August 31st. It'll be one of the first college football games of the season, which in part is exciting, but also disappointing that it's not a primetime game. And I'll get into that. And I've already talked about my feelings a couple weeks ago, but I'll add some more context towards the end here. So I think it's first important because I don't know if everybody is aware of how this process works, how it ends up that Fox gets the games that they do, or NBC or CBS, any of those. Any of the Big Ten's broadcast partners. So they basically, and this may be news to some people, other people may know this. Joel Klatt did a whole podcast on this last year. The Athletic had an article recently about it, which was very informative, I thought, about this process. But basically, there is a draft, almost like the NFL draft, any sport, where the teams or the networks, pick the games or the weekend. It depends on when in the season we're talking about. Early in the season, they pick games. Later in the season, they will pick a weekend that they get first say on the biggest game. Like, for instance, last year, the Ohio State-Indiana game. Not one that Fox would have normally picked because Ohio State-Indiana typically isn't much of a game. But as you got closer to that, Fox had the first rights of that weekend. They picked the Ohio State-Indiana game whenever that was announced. So it's kind of a weird process. It's also strange in the sense that because Fox is the primary television partner with the Big Ten, they get the top 3 picks and 5 of the first 11, unless they trade picks, which happened last year, which is why the Ohio State-Oregon game was on NBC instead of being on Fox. They traded that. I don't remember exactly what it was. It came out at the time. But so Fox, obviously, with the first 3 picks and 5 of the first 11, they want to find what they believe the best the best games for their broadcast. And as we know, Fox has had this idea that came several years ago now that they would rather play these marquee games and the noon time slot, which traditionally has been a time slot, at least in modern college football, that is usually not filled with the must-see games, right? So Fox looked at it and they saw an opportunity. They said, there's kind of a hole in that schedule. People watch College Game Day because that was the one show. Then they either tune into one of the games that just happens to be on, or they go about doing something else until one of the bigger games is on. And if you think back to before Fox really got into it, there would be the ESPN, ABC games, and then 3:30, the SEC or the Big Ten before it, where it was on CBS. And then you had the night games and whatnot on various channels. So it was typically, that noon window didn't have a lot of juice. And Fox saw that and said, why not capitalize on that when people want to be watching college football? They've just finished watching this pregame show. Let's do our own pregame show because not everyone is thrilled with ESPN. Let's follow that up with a big game. So people stay on our network, go straight through the big noon show to the big noon kickoff to the big noon kickoff game. And let's grab as many eyeballs as possible in that noon time slot. And so it was kind of a change from recent ways of thinking about how you want to schedule those big games. And is it the best thing for the fans? We'll get into that. I'm sure people here have comments we'll get throughout the show, but that was the way Fox decided to do it. The Big Ten partners with Fox to be their primary broadcast partner, and away we go. So as Ohio State fans know what's happened, and that's been Ohio State has, in their eyes, and I think it's a fair way to look at it, they've gotten shafted a little bit here because I think it was the last 6 games of last season, which included that game against Indiana, included the Penn State game, which was on the road, but all those games were noon kickoffs. And that's not all on Fox. Some of them, sometimes it wasn't Ohio State in the big noon slot, but Ohio State's night games have not been especially at home, the marquee night games of the week for quite some time. And fans love the night games. You certainly can argue that there is some recruiting advantages to having night games, though, as I talked about on the last show, it's probably not as much as many people think. But there is still, the ability to get kids from out of state or they're coming from further away on campus after playing a Friday night game is much easier to do when you have a primetime game than when you have a noon game. So Ohio State, because of the brand, because of how good the Buckeyes have been, because of how many people will tune in, whether they're Buckeye fans or not, have been the primary focus of big noon kickoff since this became a thing. And it has frustrated a lot of people. So that brings us to this year and the Texas game. It was a few weeks ago. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head. I'll see if I can pull it up here. When Fox announced that it was going to had after this draft, which took place shortly after the NFL draft, this network draft, that it had the rights, or it was broadcasting both the Ohio State-Michigan game, which is no surprise there. It's been on Fox for the last several years, and the Ohio State-Texas game in week 1. And quickly, people assumed, I even saw reports of, let's see, when was it that Fox announced? So that was on May 12th when Fox announced. So about half a month ago. I saw some reporting, which was incorrect, that when Fox announced this, that it was going to be the big noon game. And that was not what Fox announced. Fox announced they had the rights to it. And it was noticeable because they did not include a time initially. It was left open. And so that's when my ears perked up, my antenna raised, and I was like, why would you not announce the game time when you announce that you have the rights to broadcast this, especially as we all assume that if Fox is going to take Ohio State, Texas is going to be noon. What are we waiting on here? Cheers. So that's when I started doing some digging, started talking to some people. And what I found out was that there was some bona fide pushback. That's my word. From Ohio State and the powers that be over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center about about that game and when it was played. And from my understanding, Ohio State or people who represent Ohio State went to Fox and presented them with the argument of why this game should not be played at that Saturday big noon kickoff. There were two real options here. And one was to move that game back to 3:30, which is Fox's secondary window typically. And the other was the more, I don't want to say radical, but the one that was more would take more doing, more work to be done, I guess. It was moving it to Sunday, which is Labor Day weekend. Obviously, people have that Monday off. There's no NFL at that point in the season, so you're not going head-to-head with the NFL. And there are already games that get played on that Sunday of Labor Day weekend, so it's not like it would be completely unheard of. It was only, I guess, 10 years ago now that Ohio State played Virginia Tech on the Monday of Labor Day weekend, right? So the other two games on that Sunday are Virginia Tech at South Carolina, which is at 3 p.m. on ESPN, and then Notre Dame at Miami on ABC at 7:30. So in theory, if you were to have moved that game to Sunday night, let's say, you would have been going up against Miami, Notre Dame. But if you have that game on Saturday, you have, let's see, starting at 7 o'clock. Now, not all of these are games that people are going to tune into, but you have probably a couple dozen games that you're going head to head with during the games that kick off from 7:30 to 9:30. So it's understandable why they didn't want to go head to head with that. I've seen a lot of people talk about it. The other thing that I don't think has been reported enough is that Fox could not play that game, the Ohio State Texas game, at 7:30 or 8 because that date is already scheduled for Major League Baseball. That time slot's already filled on Fox's network. So moving it to Saturday night was not one of the options. That was something that Ohio State couldn't advocate for. You weren't going to move. You already have the play or the MLB games scheduled in there. So that was a non-question. As soon as the game was on Fox, it was either going to be, if it was on Saturday, it was either going to be noon or 3:30. The idea of moving it to Sunday was something Ohio State, from my understanding, thought was a good possibility. But because you are not just moving the time slot, you're moving it a whole day, you have to have approval from both sides on that. That means Texas had the opportunity to say yes or no on whether or not they wanted to move the game back 24 hours or whatever it may be. And as you all know now, and as started with our Texas 24/7 sports site, and then I kind of built off that with my reporting last week, Texas was not a willing participant. And then this past week at the SEC spring meetings, Texas athletic director Chris Del Conte was quoted about why they didn't want to move the game. And he said, "Why would I want to move the game to Sunday night and have a short week for our boys that were just told we were kicking off at high noon?" Pause there. No one had told him that. That was just an assumption. Again, hadn't been confirmed yet, though a safe assumption and obviously the right one. Continuing with Del Conte, that was never about moving the time of day. It was just, hey, do you want to move the day? We're contractually obligated to this day. That was it. The craziness is, oh my God, they said no. I just said no to Sunday. I got to go to church. I mean, hot day. So I think you can unpack that in that quote in a number of different ways. It's understandable. And I've talked to people on the Texas side of this. Cheers. And I think it's understandable why Texas didn't want to move this game. First of all, if you are Texas, why would you want to give Ohio State a competitive advantage in this process or for this game? Wouldn't you, as Texas, prefer to play this game at noon when maybe the atmosphere at the Horseshoe isn't as crazy as it would be if that game's at 7:30 or 8 p.m.? You saw what it was like for Tennessee. There's also moving the game back a day. That changes travel. A lot of fans have probably already booked flights and things like that. And while it is a long weekend, changing, I assume a lot of Texas fans are flying out of Columbus on Sunday. So that would be a lot of reshuffling there. And I think that, too, Del Conde's excuse of another game. Let me pull this back up. Exactly what he say. He said, a short week for our boys. Yeah, that was it. That one I don't buy as much. And I have had some other people tell me, Texas didn't want to have a short week to prepare for week 2. Texas plays San Jose State in week 2. I don't know off the top of my head how San Jose State did last year, but I do know that Texas was in the college football playoff semifinal against the Buckeyes and has a really good team coming back. So I imagine that the preparation for that could have been condensed. San Jose State went 7-6 last year and lost in the Hawaii Bowl to South Florida. So I don't buy that part of it. I think Texas could have easily prepared. Ohio State has Grambling in week 2. Both of those teams would have been just fine coming off of that game. But I think the other things make a lot of sense. There are reasons why Texas didn't want to do it. And if this were flipped, say it's next year, and for some reason Ohio State were asked about moving the game, I think Ohio State would probably respond similarly with, why would we do that? Why would we help Texas have a competitive advantage? Why would we inconvenience our fans? It'd be one thing if this was a conversation we were having about this game, several months ago, coming out, right after the Buckeyes win the national championship and it gets announced that it's on Fox. Okay, now there's probably more time. I still think Texas probably says no, and I still think it's fair, and that's allowed to be done based on how this all works. So from that, Fox had two options. It was either play it in the big noon kickoff time with less competition to go up against, or move it to 3:30 on Saturday. And would that have made Buckeye fans happier? I think so. I don't think it would have appeased everybody, but I think it would have made a bit of a difference. Obviously, you have more time to tailgate and whatnot the day of the game. So that might have been an option. Fox chose not to do that. Cheers. Again, I've seen some comments. If you have any questions, and it doesn't even have to be about this topic. If you have any college football questions, thoughts on anything Buckeyes, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll have time at the end. So you go. You now know the time. Fox announces the kickoff time. It's going to be at noon. It will be the game of that time slot. It's probably the game of the weekend. 2 top 5 teams. So my thoughts, and I'm curious your thoughts as well. What do you think about this? Throw those in the comments if you're watching this live. Let me know, because I feel like the consensus is most Buckeye fans are pretty irritated about this game being at noon, but I know there are some people that like noon games. So let me know here what you think. But my thoughts are, this is one of the games. I don't think, going back to what I said 2 weeks ago, let's start there. Not every big game needs to be played in prime time. You went 95-ish years of this sport without having regular night games. ESPN did a thing about, I mentioned this on the last show. ESPN did a documentary, I don't know if it was a 30 for 30 on the first night games and why that happened and how it all came about and everything. And, so college football existed for a long time without having night games and stadiums with lights and all that. So it's perfectly fine to play some bigger games, noon, 3:30. I mean, the SEC was doing 3:30 games on CBS for years. Ohio or the Big Ten has adapted some of that, though most of those games end up on Fox. But my issue, I guess I would say, is that this is the type of game that I think does deserve the primetime slot. It's a game you don't see. I mean, I know Ohio State and Texas did just play in the college football playoff semifinal, and that can happen more often now that we have an expanded playoff. But it's a game you're not going to see every year. The Penn State Ohio State game, for instance, I don't have as much issue, even if that's a top 10, top 5 game. I don't have as much issue if that's sometimes at noon, and it's been, I think, almost exclusively at noon since Fox has had broadcast rights, at least at Ohio Stadium. But like for me, that's a game that gets played, or has been a game that's gotten played pretty much every year. That won't be the case going forward, but it'll still get played fairly regularly. And I don't have an issue if that sometimes is a noon game, sometimes a 3:30 game, sometimes a night game. I've been to the Horseshoe for those games. It's electric. I've been to State College and Beaver Stadium for the whiteout games when they do that against Ohio State. Also electric. So like, I love those. They're a lot of fun to be at, to cover and do all that. But I don't think it needs to be that, because you get those games fairly regularly. Obviously, you have the Ohio State-Michigan game, which proves that you can do a big game at noon. And I think was one of the games that Fox looked at and was like, why don't we jump into that time? You look at what this is a noon game, and it's got an atmosphere and everything. So obviously you can do it. But a game like this against Texas, between two brands like Texas and Ohio State, two of the biggest brands in the sport that are playing on a home campus, for me, that screams night game. That screams, I don't care what you have to do if you're the Big Ten and these networks, get that game in prime time, because it's not going to happen in the regular season again for who knows how long. Maybe there's a scenario where these two teams meet in the college football playoff and, they're outside the top 4 or whatever the seeding may be. And you end up getting a home game for one of these teams at night, that type of thing. But you don't get it often. And so that's when I think that's when I argue that those games should be absolutely in prime time, because I just think it's special. It's not a game you get all the time. And the build up to that game is going to be nuts. It's the biggest game of the week, one of the biggest games of the season. And I know that those terms get thrown around a lot as we go through the college football season. How many games last year? Ohio State, Oregon. There were several in the SEC. Ohio State, Penn State. Like, they were all considered the biggest game of the season, right? But this one truly should be. I mean, I honestly think these are two of the best teams in the country. You've got some bona fide stars on both sides of the ball. You should give the fans the opportunity to really get after it and make that place as electric as possible, like it was with the Tennessee playoff game this past year, this past December. That type of feel that was in the shoe for the Tennessee game is what this should be for this Ohio State Texas game. And you are going to see that in a year from now, or a year from then, 2026, when Ohio State goes to Texas. That will undoubtedly, because of ESPN having the rights for the SEC, that will undoubtedly be the primetime game that week. I don't remember if it's the first week or when it is for 2026. So that's my thoughts. I just think if I'm fine with some games being big noon, even if they're big games. I don't have a huge issue with, say, Penn State or pick your game. But I think when you have Ohio State, Texas, two of the biggest, and this would be true, Ohio State's scheduled to play Alabama and Georgia down the line, right? So those games, again, not games you see all the time. Maybe you'll see them more in the playoff. But those games deserve that type of treatment where you build up to it all day. Now, I will say there are players, there are coaches who don't like that, right? And so this does cater to them to some degree. They'd rather, get up, get into their routine, play the game and get it done instead of sitting around all day. The recruiting aspect, I mentioned that earlier. Yes, this would be a game. This is a game that recruits from across the country will want to come to. And there is certainly a aspect of getting a recruit on campus, letting him see, like him and his family see game day and like everything that goes into that around the stadium and on campus, and then going to the game and, being able to walk out of the tunnel with the crowd going nuts and, experience everything that there is for one of those primetime games. But you look at Ohio State, since they've had these big noon kickoffs, the recruiting hasn't fallen off, right? And there's reasons for that. The reasons, when you come to a game, yes, you get all those things I just mentioned, but you also don't get much time with the coaches because they're working with the team, right? You get a little bit, especially after the game. And actually, the noon kickoffs kind of allow you a little bit more time to spend with recruits afterwards. But it's really not as big of a disadvantage. That is one part of what goes into a decision. And it's for some people, maybe the biggest part, but not everybody, right? There are more factors that go into making a decision on what college you want to play football at than just, did you go to a game that had an electric atmosphere? It helps. I'm not denying that. But in talking to people that have been in the recruiting business for a long time, coaches, things like that, like there's a reason that if you've been paying attention to Bucknuts or elsewhere, you probably know that official visits are about to start. There's about to be a big recruiting visit this weekend. They've got some big time prospects. There's a reason kids take their visits now, because they still get to see the campus, still get to see the facilities, all that, but they also get to really spend time with the coaches, interact with them, interact with the players, get to know those guys that they're going to spend, so much time around. And that is a valuable thing as well. So, I think there are pros and cons to each in terms of when kids take their visits, but it's not the end all be all of getting on campus for a game. If you can make it work, yeah, it can certainly play into your favor. But again, Ohio State's recruiting hasn't taken some big hit because they're playing more big time games at noon. And I think fans, and I get why, I completely get it. As a fan, I think it makes sense that you'd want the kids to come see this. But if you kind of peel back the curtain, look behind the scenes, there are some drawbacks for that. So cheers. So those are kind of my thoughts on this whole situation. Again, if you have yours, throw them in here. And if you have questions about anything Buckeye related, college football related, it doesn't have to be about the Texas game or any of the schedule. Christopher Sowers here said, it's all about the money for Fox Network. Yeah, I mean, that's why they get into it, right? Is they're trying to make money. It's the same with anything. And I get it. I think everyone gets it, but it's not ideal. It's not from a fan perspective, even from a media perspective. While I think you can still have great atmospheres at noon games, like I enjoy covering those big time games where, everyone's like the college football playoff run last year. It was awesome because at each of those games, you knew pretty much the entire country was watching your coverage of that game and whatnot. And so I think you miss some of that when it is an earlier game, though the numbers do show it does work well for Fox. Troy V says, I don't mind noon starts. Lets us kick off week one with the best foot forward. All eyes will be on that game. Would rather at night, but life goes on. Yeah, and I think that's a good response to this. Like, yeah, ideally you want it at night, but ultimately there's only so much could have been done. And again, I will say, and I don't know if this came across, I think Ohio State did pretty much everything they could. They put forth all of the options, made a push, tried to get Fox to change it. Fox was in agreement. I don't know if I mentioned that. Fox was in agreement to move it to Sunday. And I explained why, but Texas said no. And so, I want to make sure it's clear. Ohio State was pushing to get this done in some way. Poncho Cornwallis said PSU has bigger beef. Fox ruined the whiteout game. Yeah, I saw some people say that, but Penn State does have a whiteout game against Oregon this year. I'll talk about that in terms of what I think it does for the Ohio State schedule. But there have been, I think last year Penn State's, I could be wrong. I think it was like the Washington game that was the whiteout, and obviously Washington was not nearly as good despite coming off of the run they made the year before. But yeah, I mean, it certainly changed things, right? For Penn State, and changed things for everybody. All of the major programs have taken a hit. Ohio State, obviously, the biggest one. Debbie says, annoyed for sure. Hope the next contract with Fox is better negotiated as the national championship. Oh, as the national champion, OSU should get some preference. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if I am Ohio State, if I'm the Big Ten, I think the contract goes through 2029. So, we still got a few more years of this, but I think I would push to have, X number, maybe change the drafting process. Fox obviously pays more to have a bigger chunk of the pie. But yeah, maybe change the drafting process, or say, okay, you have 2 or 3, whatever number you want limited per program, or something like that, just so that it doesn't end up like this, where Ohio State is just the team that's getting selected, nearly every week. And obviously, as I said earlier, like later on in the schedule, as you draft the later weeks, you're picking the week. So you're hoping for a good game that week. And like I said, Fox ended up with Ohio State, Indiana last year, a game that they wouldn't have normally picked because Indiana was much better than people expected. Doug Shepard said, I don't understand how Texas gets veto rights. I said this earlier, but it really isn't veto rights. It's just if you're going to move a game from the day that it's scheduled on, because you already have a contract for that day, both teams have to approve it. So that would be the same if, like, for some reason Ohio State needed to move, say it's 3 years ago or whenever, Ohio State needed to move the Texas game from week 1 to week 3 for some reason, or next year Texas needs to move it. Like, you have to get approval on both sides to change the contract. It is really all it is. Tyler Kurtzley, well, until Ohio State is hit another deal with ESPN, who have primetime games at night. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Buckeye fans have their issues with ESPN too, right? It's not like everyone loves ESPN, but I think Buckeye fans might trade that at this point to get more primetime night games. So the Ohio State Texas game wasn't the only game announced this week. In fact, the Big Ten announced a bunch of games, but 4 Ohio State games. So you've got the Ohio State Texas game at noon on Fox. The week 2 game, September 6th against Grambling. I think I said Saturday, August 31st earlier for Texas. It's August 30th. Saturday, September 6th against Grambling. That will be on the Big Ten Network, and that will be at 3:30. And then the following week, Saturday, September 13th, you have Ohio University coming to Ohio Stadium, and that game will be at 7 p.m. on Peacock. So you will get a night game in there. I saw Christopher Sowers. So we finally get a night game versus OU on Peacock. Yeah, I mean, they've done this, I think, a couple years ago, maybe last year. They played, what was it? Like Western Michigan? Yeah, Western Michigan, week 2 last year. I'm pretty sure that was a night game. Look, that's not the ideal situation, right? Now, it will be interesting. I've already got some friends that live in Columbus that went to OU that are pretty pumped about that. I do think that will get some buzz because it is an in-state team that you're playing in a night game. And obviously a lot of people that live around the area that went to OU will be able to come out for that. But not the same as having Texas week 1. Obviously you weren't going to put the Ohio State Texas game on Peacock. I don't think there was a chance that was happening, but it is humorous to look at that after everything we just said and be like, OU 7 p.m. Peacock. Humorous in a that kind of sucks type of way. And then obviously end of the season, Fox has the Michigan game. That is at noon as always. So I think those probably pretty standard what you would expect, especially if you expected one of these non-conference games that wasn't the Texas game to be at night. So what about the rest of the schedule? We're just projecting here. Looking ahead, like some of the games I'm going to be guessing, but like September 27th at Washington. I would imagine similar to the Oregon game last year, that is a 7:30 Eastern time kickoff on NBC. I think it makes a lot of sense to do it that way because then you still have out west. It's a later kick, and then it's a prime time game for Ohio State and Washington on the East Coast. Now, unfortunate that you get a primetime, you get an OU primetime game, and then a week later, you're probably going to get a road primetime game. But this obviously will attract plenty of attention. I know a lot of Buckeye fans are going to travel out to Washington for this game. I do expect Washington to be better than they were last year, though I don't know quite, I don't think they'll be all the way back to what they were a couple years ago. But that game, not surprise me if that's on NBC at the 7:30 time slot. Minnesota on October 4th. Like, that's one of those kind of toss-up games. Like, that could easily be a noon game on Fox. I don't know exactly what else is on the docket that weekend. Let me see if I can pull this up easily. The schedule for that week and see if there's anything else that Fox might want from the Big Ten. I think that that's one of those. How do we do this here? Okay, I got it. So that's week 6. Sorry, I know this is great podcasting right now. Week 6, you've got Ohio at Rutgers. That's on BTN already. Buffalo at Minnesota. FS1. Oh, no. I'm looking at the wrong week. Anyway, we don't need to go through that. But, that's one of those games where I think it could be pretty much any time. I certainly think it will be a day game. I don't expect it to be a night game. Maybe if Minnesota, comes out of the gates hot. Week 7 at Illinois. Again, to me, that screams easy noon game for Fox because you can, you still get the big audience with Ohio State. Maybe Illinois is decent at that point. Week 8, Wisconsin. So I believe, let me look here. So the NBC time slot that weekend is already filled. The NBC primetime slot has Notre Dame USC. So at Wisconsin, I guess that could be a Fox game, though they probably wouldn't have had the pick to take that, given how I think other things probably played out. So that could be a 3:30 CBS game that still gives you time at Camp Randall to tailgate and everything. The Penn State game in week 10, let's be honest, as much as that could be a night game. And maybe that's the way Ohio State kind of gets paid back for this. Fox gets this Texas game, but maybe they switch it so that you get the night game on NBC. I think more likely than not, though, given kind of what we know about the super secretive draft, I imagine the Penn State game will be a noon game again. You've got Purdue the next week. Again, your guess is as good as mine on that. I think that, that could be noon. That could be 3:30. You could throw that game on Peacock. The last time Ohio State played at Purdue, it was on Peacock. So, and I'm pretty sure that was a noon game. So, toss up. No, I don't think anyone's fighting over that game. UCLA coming to Columbus, November 15th. That's a game I think, while I don't know how good UCLA will be, I could certainly see that having some interest the first time those two teams will have played in quite some time. Let's see. When was the last time these two teams played? It was 2001. And that was the Rose Bowl. At the Rose Bowl. The last time we played in Columbus was 1999. So I do think there will be some interest there, even if even if UCLA, I should say, excuse me, still recovering from this trip to Europe and stumbling over some words. That would not surprise me if Fox wanted that one. But maybe you get a night game there. It is November, so they've been more hesitant about those, but we've seen more and more games. But I do think it would be. I do think that game is intriguing. Then Rutgers the next week. That screams Big Ten Network. Whatever time on Big Ten Network. I think most of the time Ohio State has played Rutgers. It's been on BTN. So I think either noon or 3:30 for that. And then obviously you have the Michigan game on November 29th. We know that is a noon kickoff. So interesting comment here from John Laparo. What is the big deal about game times? I'd watch Ohio State at 7 a.m. if that's when they play. Yeah, and I think that's what Fox knows, right? Is that, look, there's going to be backlash, and there has been, but people are going to tune in, and the numbers speak for themselves. And that is the reason right there why Fox keeps picking Ohio State, because the fans will tune in. Like you said, you could play it in the middle of the night. You could play it in the morning. You could play it at 8 p.m., whatever. Fans will tune in. So, it's kind of the blessing and the curse, right, of being an Ohio State fan, is that, your team is going to get attention no matter what. But sometimes that means, and now more often than not, you're going to get kind of the shaft, as I said earlier, with a noon kickoff for a game like Texas. So, all right. Well, I think I didn't see any questions in here. I'm scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Yeah, I think we got it all. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Oh, David Shannon asks, why are you stumbling and bumbling? Talk about something you know. Yeah. Well, I do know this, but as I said off the top, I just came back from 5 days overseas and still readjusting to the time and things like that. But wanted to get a show out because we didn't do a show last week. And obviously this has been a big topic and something that I did a lot of work to cover. So I wanted to give you guys sort of the background there and kind of the behind the scenes, as I understand it, of Ohio State really pushing to get this game at a later time or even a day later. And it did not work out. Ohio State and Texas will play at noon. But as I think you will hear from the coaches, the players, as we get closer, whenever they get asked about this, they'll play it whenever. We're going to cover it whenever. You guys will watch it whenever, right? So it is what it is. Nothing we can do about it now, but there was that push. I felt like I wanted to get that out there since I did try and cover that pretty extensively. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. If you're on the YouTube live here, please hit that subscribe button, turn on alerts. Again, we'll be ramping up with recruiting coverage this next month, and then we're not far now, end of July from when things, even Big Ten Media Days in July. So get ready. All the videos, all our podcasts, you'll get all that on YouTube. If you are on a podcast platform, please leave us a 5-star review, give us some comments, all of that. It helps. I will leave you with this. These aren't my words. These are Doug's words. Fox sucks. And I think that is how a lot of Buckeye fans feel right now, and understandable. As I said, this game should be at night. This is the type of game that screams prime time. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. Should be back next week. I am going to start to try and have some guests on. I've talked to some people. It's just about timing and things like that. Even today, I wanted to have one of our Texas guys on to give kind of their side of things, which I tried to summarize, but it just didn't work out with stuff he had going on. So I do want to have some guests on here as we get into the summer. Also, if you didn't see it 2 weeks ago, Bill and I started doing a more recruiting focused podcast. We'll pick that up again, I think next Monday, early next week sometime. And then I'll be back later next week, hopefully with a guest that we can talk some more interesting stuff. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in for another Bucknuts Happy Hour. Cheers, and we'll talk soon.